right. Well, good morning. How's everybody doing today? Good. Now we're alive. It seemed like, man, we got a little bit of a New Year slump already because the dreariness outside. It's okay. It's still a beautiful day that God has made, and I'm glad to be here with you in it. And today, as we start this new year, we're going to be in a new series. As you see, this thing called Rest of Your Life. Our high schoolers and our middle schoolers last summer. Uh, Way back in 2024 in their conference in the summer, they did this thing with CIY, and this was kind of the theme where they sat in this topic for a while, and we liked it so much that we thought we'd bring it to Big Church and go along the ride with you guys. So I pray that we're not doubling down. If we double down a little bit, it is what it is. But you guys, I promise you, you will be involved at the end of this series in some way. So we may roundtable them, do something like that. But I'm excited for what this new year brings. I hope that you are as well. And as we are, going through this today, let me remind you, we will be in our Bibles today. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 11. And also, I'm going to try something new. We're going to have some Bibles. If you don't have a Bible with you, we want you to let us know, because we would love to get you a Bible. We want to place one in your hand over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully, you'll see some Bibles that you might even be able to take home. And if you have your own Bible, that's great. Bring it, because we're always going to be in it. All right, that's who we are. We're a church that's going to be studying through Scripture. After this little 5-week series, we're going to start a big, lengthy series in the book of Luke. And it won't be all continuous, just like we've done over the past few years. But as we're in the book of Luke, it's going to take us about 25, 26 weeks. So we'll break it up in chunks. Can't wait. Been going through the preaching schedule this week. I think you're going to be excited about what's happening here at Rich Christian. So I'm glad that you're here. And I pray that as we go on this journey together, we can continue to try to accomplish our mission of helping people follow Jesus. That's what this is all about. I hope that we in here can help you follow Jesus, and I hope you can help others follow Jesus. And it's just this cycle that should never stop, because that's what we've been called to. That's our mission here in this world. So anyway, all right, let's go. I'm looking for some honest reactions here. Just a question as we're getting going. The question I have is, how many of you feel stressed? How many of you feel hurried? Okay, there we go. Thank you for being honest. How many of you feel anxious about stuff? You don't have to say out loud what it is. How many of you feel pressured by anything right now? How many of you feel burdened? I mean, there's a lot of things right now that have our heads going. We walk in here, and I think sometimes we come in here and you just want to just forget about the worries of the world. And that's great. And I think you should, because just like we saying, come lay those things down at the foot of the cross. I mean, that's in general what we should be doing to Jesus all the time. Not just when you come in here to worship with a church, as a gathering of believers. Matt, you should know, as an individual in Christ, you can lay those things down at Jesus. But inevitably, we're going through some things. And the Christmas season, as beautiful as it is, as pretty as it gets, right? Let's just be honest. It hurries us up. It makes us anxious. Some of us are probably walking out of there with more credit card debt than we really wanted to. And there's just a lot of pressures. There's a lot of burdens. There's a lot of anxiety that comes along with that. And that's really what we're going to aim at as we go through this series. I want you to just acknowledge today, if you haven't already realized it, we are in a culture of just exhaustion. We're exhausted people. Wherever you stand, whatever age you are, you're probably feeling exhausted. I mean, I've got kids in high school right now who I know from their words, they feel a little overwhelmed about the way things are coming up this semester. They've been off for 2 weeks, and that's great. That's awesome. But knowing that what the next semester brings, I know that you guys are sitting in this. Some of you may have been on vacation over the last couple of weeks, and you had to use all that up, and now you feel overburdened about having to go back to work and deal with that person or whatever it is. So some of it's in our relationships. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's things that burden us. There are things that overwhelm us. There are things that really just exhaust us. I want to tell you about a man who was struggling with exhaustion. And he told some friends that he felt like, he said, a diseased bundle of nerves, which I think is a pretty cool phrase. I like the way he put that. In words, and I'm going to read you a quote from him in a minute. In words, he tried to diagnose the source of his anxiety, the source of his weariness. And this is what he said. He shared with how many people he knew who were, and hopefully it's behind us, struggling with the effects of addiction to stimulating substances, sensational news stories and entertainment, of commerce and high-speed communications, noise pollution, and the constant pressure to organize work and travel on an exacting schedule. How many of you can relate to that? Okay, one of us. You're liars. You know that that's what's going on, and it sounds like something that might be described right now today. But here, let me show you this. That's actually from Henry David Thoreau back in 1845. That's mind-blowing to me. That what was going on back then. It seems like that's exactly what's happening with us today, right? And that is just the life that we live as humans. So if you are in 2025 here and you're thinking, man, but it's so different than it used to be. That's not. And Jesus speaks to that, and we're going to talk to that here in just a little bit in Matthew chapter 11. I want to read one more quote here, and it says this, and this is not Henry David Thoreau. It says, our lives grow too complex and overcrowded. Even the necessary obligations which we feel we must meet, they grow overnight. Before we know it, we are bowed down with burdens. We're crushed under committees and commitments, strained, breathless, hurrying, panting through a never-ending program of appointments. It goes on to say, we are too busy to be good partners to our partners, good companions to our children, good friends to our friends, and with no time at all to be friends to the friendless. And again, this is something that happens today, but that even was written almost 100 years ago by a guy named Thomas Kelly in 1940. So it's an everlasting issue of hurry and anxiety and burden and busyness and stress and whatever it is that is on your plate right now, and you think, and it's okay, it's pretty cute if you think you're the only one, but you're not. We all feel this way. It's just the reality. Whether you're in high school or whether you're about to retire, we all feel this way. But how do we, what is the antidote to this? And that's why we wanted to hit this from the very beginning of the year. Today, more than ever, we realize that we live in this culture of exhaustion. It's just who we are. It's what we find ourselves in. We're chronically tired, right? We're always stressed. We're hurried. All these things. We're overwhelmed by life's demands and pressure. And so what would we do? We dream of vacations. We dream of a day off or another day off or another day, right? And we even dream of winning the lottery or something because we think that that's going to cure all our ills. We're longing for some kind of answer for the stress and the hurry of this world. And I'm just going to say this. I think sometimes we try to do it. I know sometimes we try to do it the wrong way. So what do? How do we do this? How do we fix this? Well, here's an idea. Let's make this year's New Year's resolution. Let's make it a point to gather with the church on a regular basis. No, I'm just kidding. I say that as a pastor because I know you're like, oh, I expect them to say that. That might be a good idea, but there's way more to it than that, than going to church. And I truly believe that this allows us to slow down for at least an hour, right? It allows us to slow down, and I commend you if you make this a part of your schedule. But if you make it a part of your schedule and it's a burden on you, then we got a long ways to go. This should be a burden. We should be able to come in here and rest and pause and relax in the presence of God, knowing that He's got things, and we don't have to worry about getting to the next thing afterwards and all that. But the reality is sometimes this might cause you stress. I mean, how many young parents do we have in here? Getting your kids ready, coming up here. God bless you. I haven't had to do that in all my ministry career. My wife has dealt with that because I come up here and I'm doing this stuff. I'm preparing for this stuff. And yeah, things get hurried up here. But you know what it's like to get kids ready even to come to a church gathering, right? It's tough and it's stressful. And we want those things to be pain-free. But I would say this. Let's practice something different. Let's pause. Let's take a breath. Let's wait it out for a minute. Let's close our eyes. Honestly, let's do that right now. Just close your eyes. Because I just want to pray as we continue on. Allow God to just breathe through us. God, you are the maker of all things, the giver of all things. And you are to be praised and honored for all that. And for all the things that we forget to praise and honor you about, help us to remember those right now. Yet as our lives become somewhat taxed and hurried and all these things, allow us to stop. You always have allowed us to. Force us to stop, to pause, to not reach back for that play or that fast forward button, but just to sit in the moment and to realize your love and your care for your people. When we have hurts, when we have burdens, when we have deadlines, when we have friction in our relationships, God, you know, and you care, and you desire for us not to take that stress on our hearts and our lives. So, God, as we move forward in these moments of sitting in your word, I pray that we can just be honest with ourselves. That many of us have tried to be the antidote. We've tried to do it ourselves, and we've edged you and your son Jesus out, if just a little bit. Help us not to do that today. Help us to move forward in this year with some balance and some guidance to be able to take the proper steps with you beside us. We give you all these things in your son Jesus' name. Amen. I'm grateful to be able to come here and stop and pause, because I know your schedules are probably even busier than mine is at times, but we all kind of understand what we're going through. This culture of exhaustion can be really a difficult. It can come on us because of a difficult season of life. And when that season of life is done, you know what we do? We try to refill it with something else. I acknowledge that maybe you're a single mom and you barely have time to breathe, and you're doing all those things and raising the kids. And maybe you're a divorced dad who's doing 2 jobs and you're trying to make ends meet. I don't know every one of your situations, but maybe you're working for a boss who demands more than you have the ability to give. I don't know where you are, but I do realize that we're there, that there's some of us there in different spots. And I know that on top of all those things, there is the regular day-to-day life. There is paying bills. There is household chores. There is taking care of yourself. I get all that. That's just the reality of where we're at. But for some of us, we just can't slow down. And it's because, let's be honest with ourselves, we don't want to. We choose to stay busy after that difficult season of life. And we want to fill that void up with something else that we don't have to think about the reality of the hurt or the pain. So we choose to overschedule. People wear themselves out constantly. That's just where we are. And sometimes we wear it as a badge of honor. Things are busy, and you say it with a smile on your face, and you fist pump each other, and like, hey, yeah, things are busy. Let's slow down, bro. Let's just slow down. We don't have to be busy. You don't have to. You may be wired that way, and it's okay until you approach burnout, but you don't have to be there. Misplaced priorities are going to pop up sometimes, but once you recognize that, it might be because you're too busy, and you didn't get to where you wanted to get because of the overschedule. So let's get real on this. Just talking to somebody right outside the doors here. Some of us can't slow down because there are control issues. And I say that because I try to control those things often. And if you're honest with yourself, you're probably fit in the same boat. If I don't do it, then things won't turn out the way that I want, right? That's just the reality of it. We don't want to let things go because we want to control it. And I'm trying hard to be honest with myself about that. I want you guys to know that. So hitting pause, slowing down is what we're called to do. It's going to give us some time to think, and the truth is, some of us just don't know how to, right? We just don't know how to. So if our purpose as a church, if our purpose as individuals is to help people follow Jesus, if our purpose is to go out and preach the gospel or speak the gospel to somebody, if that's our purpose, guess what we won't be able to do if we're overtaxed? We won't be able to do what we were created for. And as Christians, as believers, if you're so busy that you're missing out on God's greatest purpose for your life, then you're not only going to be stressed out, but you're going to be empty. And you're not going to find joy. Because God created us to walk in step with Him and to accomplish His purposes, do kingdom-type things. And if we are at odds with the way Jesus wants us to do life, then we're just going to be empty, and we're not going to find that purpose filling up our life. So we need to drastically slow things down. And I want to go into the Bible to see what happens, what Jesus says, what He offers for us. Because sometimes I think we know what He offers, but let's just revisit. This isn't some brainchild idea of mine. It's like we realize this is where we need to go. So Matthew chapter 11 speaks to this. Jesus is talking to people who are busy, who are overtaxed, who are stressed, and all these things. And this is what He says. He invites us to something better. In chapter 11, verse 28, He says this, "Come to me." Here's that first. He's inviting you. Come to me, He says. "All who labor and are heavy laden, and I will" what? "I will give you rest." So when we talk about the rest of your life, kind of a double meaning. You have the rest of your life. So we're looking forward here at the new year, and we're going forward with this new purpose. And what am I going to do for the rest of my life? But Jesus is speaking for the rest for your life. That's what's going on here. He says, "Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, Jesus calls out those specific people who are burdened. Now, I think we all fit into this one of these two categories in some way. In this specific setting, he's calling on people to lean on Him, right? This is what He says, "Come to me. Lean on me instead of leaning on your self-sufficiency." Let's come to a greater source of hope and strength than any flawed individual, because God is perfect, right? Jesus was the perfect man. Yes, He was fully God, but He was also a man dealing with a lot of man decisions, and He lived this perfect life. And He says, "I'm going to offer you what I can give you that you can't do on your own," right? So come to me. Do that. And He calls those who, what does it say? Who labor. I'm reading out of the ESV. I usually will, and there's some differences that are going to be in the NIV and ESV. And of course, there's thousands of translations, hundreds, maybe I should say. I don't know if there's 1,000 yet. But there's hundreds of them. And this one, when we talk about labor, it implies that there's burdens that we take upon ourselves, so it makes us work. Can't help but to think about labor that you ladies have gone through, right? That's a burden I don't want upon myself. Thank God you're the woman, not me, right? So labor is not something that's a great thing. And it wasn't necessarily intended to be a great thing. Yes, it was a punishment from creation whenever man sinned, right? You will labor. There will be work. It's not a fun thing, right? Occupations can be fun, but work, labor is not intended to be fun. It's a burden. That's what He's talking about. We have a burden that we take upon ourselves as humans. And when He calls those who are heavy laden, what that implies is not something that you take upon yourself, but something that someone puts upon you. Now, you're thinking about a different category, right? So what do people put upon you? What do people ask of you? Maybe you're doing that extra thing at work, that extra job that you don't get stipend for. It's just, oh, here, we're going to add this responsibility or whatever. Maybe it's something that you are a parent and you're living life and it's great and your kids, it seems to be great, but your kid makes a decision that ends up bringing an extra burden on your life, and it is what it is. That's just what parenting is, right? And we do that as parents to kids, too. Our parents make decisions that in your way, whether it's right or wrong, doesn't much matter. I'm not picking sides here, by the way. By the way, the parents are right. Anyway, I'm not picking sides. But parents, we put burdens on you. You become heavy laden. Other people put things on you. You also put things on yourself. And Jesus is speaking to both of them. Understand that. So when you see both of those things, you have what we take upon ourselves, and then you have what other people put upon us. And they're not great. Burdens aren't great regardless. When I think of them, I can't help but to think about the things that weigh me down. Vacations. Anybody just take a vacation recently? Go on a flight? Anybody? We don't do that here in Kuwait, evidently. Okay. Man, it was probably last January. Yeah, last year was my last time I went on a trip, on a flight. But I can't help but to think about all the stuff that you pack to go on these vacations. So you put all this stuff. You're going to go away for a week, and it's sure it doesn't seem like a burden. But you remember the days whenever luggage did not have wheels on it? Anybody remember that? I have one of those big giant duffel bags that I used to take around as a youth minister, carry it over to camp all the time. But never had any wheels on it, and I'm talking big, like bigger than like a catcher's gear bag type stuff, big stuff. And I used to throw it over my shoulder. That's a heavy burden. That's a heavy weight. But we have these wheels now. We can go through the airport. It's like, oh, this is awesome. I have something that is taking the weights off of me now. Now that's kind of what Jesus is alluding to here. He wasn't thinking about our luggage in 2025, but it does make me think about it. So there's this kind of old world idea for this as well. For those who traveled across the land, they had these things called beast of burden. Never really heard that phrase. Anybody really heard this phrase? A beast of burden is essentially it's a donkey, pack mule, someone who would carry your stuff for you. It's the wheels on the luggage is what it is. So they're going across the rocky terrain, the desert terrain, or whatever. And it's like a pack animal, like these things here. And this is not something I would want to be traversing with. So you put it on someone else, something else in this matter here. Please, if you're a part of PETA, don't look at this. I'm not condoning this. It just is what it is. Anyway, Jesus says this. If you feel weary from your burdens, your pack, if you feel loaded down by this stuff, come to me and I will carry that burden for you. I will take it off your shoulders. You don't have to worry about toiling. You move forward. This is what he says. I will give you rest. Notice he doesn't say, I might give you rest. It might make it lighter for you. He says, I will give you rest. You can earn your rest. That's a promise from Jesus. And if that's something you need to hear today, if that's the only thing you need to hear today, that's who Jesus is. That's what he offers. You, me, all of us in here who are trying to do things on our own so much, God bless us for trying. Jesus says, that's not the way it's intended to be. You lean on me. Give me your pack. I will carry it for you. So Jesus says, if you feel weary, if you feel heavy laden, loaded down by these burdens, come to me. I'll give you rest. Verse 29 tells us how to find that rest. And he says this. He says, take my yoke upon you. And that's not common vernacular. We don't talk about yokes all the time, do we? But I don't know if you know what a yoke is, but here's a picture of a yoke. This is something that would be put around animals. Two animals that would carry a burden, that would carry the load more than anything. So you kind of think about the animals in the field that might be dragging something. When one couldn't do it, another one would be joined with them, and they would be yoked together to move forward. So Jesus is using this terminology that they would absolutely know. They're familiar with this, and even in third world countries today, they're still using stuff like this all the time. But a farmer would yoke two, let's just say oxen. They would yoke two oxen together, attached to something like a plow or whatever. Usually this oxen would be pulling it through the field, but the farmer, and now listen to this, he would avoid putting two equal age, equal experience animals together. Why is that? Because they'd be fighting for dominance all the time. You got this alpha syndrome, whatever. So he would put this older, more experienced, strong animal with a younger, still strong, but younger and inexperienced. And here's the thing with the older one. He's done this before. He's paced out. He's ready to do this, but he's going to go at the right pace. This new one, you know what happens with a new one when you give it a job? I'm ready to go. Let's get off the road. Let's go. Let's try. But why do you yoke them together? So that one can be paced with the other. That's what's happening here. So I want you to see, you might kind of hear where I'm getting with this. The older one would move with a sustainable pace so that the younger one, who's trying to do all the busyness, all the all the fast-paced life, whatever it is, so they would slow down. So they'd pause just a little bit and get the job done better. Maybe you read Jesus' promise when he said, you will find rest here. And you think that you're going to get some kind of day of relaxation. You're going to get a vacation day. You accept Jesus. Some people might be told this about Jesus' salvation that he offers. Hey, accept Jesus. It's going to be like a vacation the rest of your life. It's not that way, is it? That's not the Christian life. You don't just get some day of relaxation. You don't get a day off of work. You don't get a day without kids. All life continues. Burdens continue. And it sounds like what some of us might think about is that you get the Sabbath. That's not exactly what Sabbath and rest is. Now, Sabbath is a day off. It's a biblical term for when you stop working. And that was something that, as we went through Exodus all last year, right, we come to that point in the Ten Commandments to stop. Don't work for a day. Work 6 days, that's fine. You could do that, but don't work for a day. That's a different kind of rest. This rest that we're talking about here is something that Jesus wants to take on himself to lighten the load, to carry it alongside of us. This passage here in Matthew 11, if you don't know this, context is king. Go back to Matthew 10. It's going to lead into 11. And the way Matthew writes his gospel, all of it's going to flow. And the reason I tell you this is because in Matthew chapter 12, right after this passage, you're going to get into two different scenarios where Jesus comes against some authorities on the Sabbath and on rest. So it's like, okay, he's weaving all this stuff together, Matthew is, and he's putting some different rest scenarios in our midst here. So I want to encourage you, make that connection, go read it in its entirety. But a yoke is it's not a tool of rest, it's a tool of action. So when he says this action, I'm going to take my yoke upon you, take my action with you, is what he's saying. Take my movement with you. It's this tool of forward progress. And here's what Jesus invites us to do, right? When we are weary, when we are burdened, we take on Jesus' yoke. We place this on ourselves next to Jesus. I'm writing this the other day. I'm trying to figure out, how do I not mention Carrie Underwood, Jesus taking the wheel? So I'm not mentioning that. All right? But it's kind of what you think of, right? Like, I'm driving this car, and I'm inviting Jesus to come along and do some of the steering, do some of the pacing, trying to help me out along this road. So many times we think, and we act like the younger animal just wanting to take off and go, get it done, and Jesus says, hey, yoke up with me and let me sustain your pace. This is what can change your life. Let me help you carry the burden. Let me give you rest. And here's kind of a main point that I would encourage you with. Jesus gives us rest not by ceasing from doing anything, but by inviting us to be yoked with him. Okay? So it's not some free pass, some hall pass from having to do work, but inviting him to do it with us. That's what this is. So all the greatness of your life, all the schedule of your life, and all the things that bring you joy, he's not saying you have to quit all that stuff. He's saying, include me in that stuff. Let me take the wheel. Yoke up with me. Let's do all this stuff. So here's this word easy that you see in here. Whenever he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That word easy, the Greek word is this. It's krestos, and it means well-fitting. And I think that's important to understand what that means. It means this. When you yoke up with Jesus, just like a yoke that you would see earlier, some of these old-fashioned yokes, they would put these yokes upon these oxen, these animals, and just choke them out like gall. They wouldn't do that. They would make it well-fitting. And Jesus wants to do that with us. I want to make this burden easier to where it's well-fitting in your life. You think it's a burden, you think it's bad, but it might not be bad. It might be a burden of growth. It might be a burden of you changing in a specific direction. But alongside me, I'm not going to choke you out on this and take you along for the ride. I'm going to make it well-fitting to where we go on this pace together. That's kind of what he means by that. I think that's important for us to see. So you could say that the yoke was tailor-made to fit us. This becomes easier because Jesus comes along and he says, I want it to be tailor-made for you. So what if the fix isn't our exhaustion or another day off or another vacation day? Jesus acknowledges that his yoke is not going to, it's not going to take everything from us, but it's going to take something that might be unnatural for us and make it easier, make it fit better in our lives. So something has to be learned here, right? And that's what it says in verse 29, that you will learn. You will learn from me. Jesus wants to go on this process with you. And so if you ever hear churchy people talk about churchy things, they say stuff like progressive sanctification. That's what that is that you will learn as you go on how to do this life with Christ. You will progressively be sanctified, and I will make things fit in your life. So he's not going to give you something more than you can handle. You've heard that before, right? But the things that you are handling, he's going to make more fit well in your life, right? That's what's happening here. So anyway, here's the question I would have for you. If you're trying to do all these things on yourself, you're trying to do your own thing, and you think you've got it figured out, and you think you got this pace of life figured out, how is it working for you? How is it going? Because I think some of us may have raised our hands, whether at an obligation or not. I think some of us may have raised our hands earlier, but if we're honest with ourselves, we're trying to do it ourselves. How's it working? Can you keep doing it? Is it sustainable to go about life that way? I mean, seasons of exhaustion quickly become a lifestyle. That's what happens, because when we get through these seasons, we tend to find these other things to fill. And I would just ask, how are you handling it? But we can be yoked with Jesus, and he gives us that invitation. Come to me. Yoke up with me. That's your invitation today. So throughout this series, we're going to be dipping in and out of Psalm 23. That's what Brody read for us earlier, and I'm just grateful to sit in Scripture and hear this stuff. And as we do that, I just want to briefly look at that passage, the first part of that passage today. I want to read some of this because it kind of connects the dots for me a little bit, where King David writes that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When he says that I hope and pray that this is our attitude. This is what we want to get to, right? That we don't want to want things. We want to be at ease and content with the life that's in front of us. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That's what we want. I don't want anything because my needs are met by the shepherd. If I'm a sheep in this scenario, which I believe we all are, right? If I'm a sheep in this scenario, my needs are supplied by the Lord, the shepherd. Just like a sheep's needs are going to be supplied by the shepherd. Sheep, as you've heard 1,000 times, right? They're dumb animals. They can't do anything on their own. And they need a shepherd. They need someone to poke and pull them along. That's why there's a rod and there's a staff, right? They need someone along the way. So to have the Lord as my shepherd is to have everything I need. That's awesome. And then the psalm goes on and it talks about what the shepherd provides. And this is where I'm going to stop today. It was just this little verse. He makes me lie down in green pastures. And that's one of those ones that's kind of the pretty verse, and it might be on someone's frame somewhere. Yeah, I understand that. But hear what's really happening here. This is what he says. He makes me. He makes me lie down. You know why it says he makes me? Because sheep don't naturally lie down on their own. And here's why. Because sheep are weird animals. Sheep are weird. I'm learning. I read a little too much about sheep this week. And as I do this, here's some of the things I learned. One, they won't lie down for 4 reasons, really. One of those reasons is they won't lie down if they're afraid. So they're constantly afraid. They're timid animals. They won't lie down if there's friction among the sheep. So they're social animals. Think about what you are as sheep in the church and all this stuff, right? Some of us are afraid. Some of us are social people. So they won't lie down if there's friction. They won't lie down if there's flies or parasites that trouble them. So if there's anything that's in the air that's worrisome, they're not going to lie down because of that. And then they won't lie down if they're anxious about food or they're hungry. So pretty much anything that they're anxious about keeps them awake, and they won't lie down. So what needs to happen? The shepherd needs to make them lie down. So do you see what's happening here? There's busyness. There's all these anxieties that are in the sheep's life, just like us. And we need a shepherd to make us lie down. So really, rest only comes for the sheep when they aren't anxious about anything, when they're not, when they're not hungry, when they're not worried about germs or whatever. That's the only time that we can get rest. And that would be the challenge for you and me today. You got all these thoughts that are going on around you. Allow God to make you lie down, because you've got all these thoughts that are circling around in your brain here, and this culture that you're living in keeps you exhausted, and this keeps you anxious all the time. And Jesus would eventually tell his followers what that he was the good shepherd, right? We know that. And the good shepherd is what everyone would have thought of in Psalm 23 whenever he said that. They would have thought about the shepherd, and the Lord is their shepherd. And here's what I would say, church. Real rest comes from when he's in charge. Real rest comes from when he's in charge. So if the symbol of salvation is the cross, then let me keep that other image in your brain just for a minute. For a moment. The symbol of surrender could be the yoke. Take that symbol upon you. Take some surrender pills here, people. Let's slow down. Let's pause. Let's allow him to take over and to at the very least, walk beside us, if not in front of us. And when you do that, you will find rest. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word, for the truths, for the encouragement, for the challenges of your word. Even when it's tough to chew, even when it's really tough to put into our situation because we know we have overburdened ourselves sometimes. God, we just thank you. Thank you for the humble reminder of who we are. We are anxious sheep. Help us to rest in you. Help us to seek you for our salvation and for our joy. And we put all that hope in you and your son Jesus today. Amen.